She thought she was signing away 12 months until the billionaire who married her for revenge fell first and risked everything to save her from the trap she'd walked into trying to save him. Amara Bennett's signature cost her a year of freedom, but bought her family's survival. Damien Voss, 32-year-old self-made millionaire with a damaged reputation and trust issues from an ex who'd sold his company's secrets, needed a wife to stabilize his board's confidence, and she needed her mother's clinic saved before loan sharks destroyed her brother. So they made a deal with clear boundaries, separate bedrooms, pre-written responses for the press, and an expiration date that promised she'd walk away richer and he'd walk away redeemed. Except Damien had chosen her for a reason he'd never revealed. Her late father had been accused of stealing medical AI research from Voss Biotech in a theft that nearly destroyed his IPO. And marrying James Bennett's daughter felt like justice for a wound that had never healed. Revenge disguised as rescue. Until she hummed while washing dishes and the sound stopped him in doorways. Until his hand trembled when they danced and he realized intimacy terrified him more than betrayal. Until he paid off debts he didn't have to touch and started wondering when protection had stopped being strategy and become something he couldn't name. Then she found the file, confronted him with her father's name on decade-old accusations, and he admitted, at first because of him, with a silence that said everything about how that had changed. And days later, when Julian Crane leaked their contract marriage to the press and manipulated her desperate attempt to save her clinic into providing forged documents that framed Damien for embezzlement, when federal investigators circled and his board voted to suspend him, and she showed up bleeding from paparazzi microphones with recorded proof that Julian had fabricated everything, when they stood in the wreckage of lies that had nearly destroyed them both, Damien looked at her and said the words that turned contract into choice. Not if I lose you. And suddenly the man who'd spent 5 years building walls after betrayal had to decide if he was brave enough to tear them down for a woman who'd started as revenge and become the only thing that felt real. But could she forgive him for the reasons he'd chosen her? And could he survive the vulnerability of admitting that the billionaire who'd bought a wife had somehow ended up being the one who was owned? My beautiful family, I adore you. You're not just viewers. You're my heart, my peace, and my purpose. May heaven fill your days with blessings and your nights with calm. May every step you take be guided by love and joy. You're chosen, protected, and wrapped in grace. Thank you for being my strength. Together, we're unstoppable. Comment your country and let's know where you are. The evening sun cut through the glass walls of Voss Enterprises, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The contract lay on the mahogany table between them like a verdict. The undersigned agrees to a marriage of convenience for a duration of 12 months. Amara Bennett, 24 years old and trembling despite her best efforts to appear calm, stared at the document that would erase her family's debt and her freedom. She'd built her mother's clinic from the ground up, worked 3 jobs to put her brother through school, and never once asked for help. Now, in this moment, she was about to sign away a year of her life to a stranger. Her fingers hovered above the pen, and she could feel the weight of everything that had led her here. The foreclosure notice on the clinic, the loan sharks circling her brother, the medical bills that multiplied like a disease. Across from her sat Damien Voss, 32, self-made millionaire, owner of an empire that spanned continents. His charcoal Tom Ford suit fit him like armor. His gray eyes unreadable as he watched her with the patience of a man who knew she had no other choice. Everything about him screamed control, from the perfect line of his jaw to the way his fingers rested precisely on the leather armrest. "You have my terms, Miss Bennett," he said, voice smooth as expensive scotch. "No emotion, no expectation, just cooperation." Amara swallowed against the dryness in her throat. "And when the year is over?" "You'll walk away richer," he replied, each word measured and exact. "And I'll walk away redeemed." Redeemed, the word hung between them like a question she wasn't allowed to ask. "Miss Bennett," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, making her jump. "The car is ready. Press is waiting at the east entrance." Press, of course. This wasn't just a business transaction. It was a performance. A billionaire's damaged reputation restored by a convenient wife. Amara picked up the pen, feeling its weight like a prison sentence. But when she thought of her mother's clinic, the patients who depended on it, the staff who'd become family, her brother's terrified face when the men had cornered him outside his dorm, her hand steadied. She signed. The moment the ink dried, Damien's gaze lifted to hers. It was meant to be cool, evaluating, the look of a man studying an asset he'd just acquired. But for a fleeting second, so brief she almost missed it, something flickered there, something human, something dangerous. "Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Voss," he said, and she hated how easily the title fell from his lips. The elevator descent felt eternal. Damien stood beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and cold, like winter forest. He offered his arm. "For the cameras," he clarified, as if she might think it was anything more. She took it. The lobby doors opened to a storm of flashing lights. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions she couldn't distinguish over the chaos. But Damien moved through them like he was born for this, his grip on her arm firm but not bruising, guiding her toward the black car that waited like an escape pod. Inside, the silence was deafening. The driver pulled into traffic, and Amara finally allowed herself to breathe. She stared at the ring on her finger, a platinum band with a single emerald, chosen by someone else, sized to fit her perfectly without ever asking her preference. "Thank you," she found herself saying, the words feeling inadequate, "for saving my family." Damien didn't look at her. He was already back to his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be stock reports. "Don't mistake terms for mercy, Miss Bennett. This is a business arrangement. You provide value, I provide compensation." The coldness should have been expected, but somehow it still stung. That night, alone in the guest room of his penthouse, her room now, she supposed, Amara stared at her phone. 3 texts from her mother. "The clinic lights are on again. How did you do this? Are you okay?" One from her brother. "I can breathe again, sis. Thank you. I don't know what you did, but thank you." She couldn't tell them. The non-disclosure clause had been very clear. To the world, this was a whirlwind romance. The truth that she'd sold herself to save them would stay buried under paperwork and performance. "1 year," she whispered to the empty room, touching the ring that felt foreign on her hand. "I can survive 1 year." Across the city, in his private study, Damien Voss stared at the trending photo on his phone. The image showed him and Amara leaving Voss Enterprises, her hand in his, both of them looking like the perfect couple. The headline read, "Billionaire finally finds his match." His jaw tightened. A private notification pinged. Julian Crane, his oldest business rival. "Nice purchase. Hope she's worth the price." Damien deleted the message without responding, but he couldn't delete the memory it triggered. 5 years ago, he'd believed in love, had planned a future with a woman who'd sworn she wanted nothing from him but his heart. Then he discovered she'd been feeding his company's secrets to competitors, using him as a ladder to climb higher. Trust was a luxury he'd learned he couldn't afford. This arrangement with Amara was different. It was honest, transactional. No one could betray terms they'd never hidden. She knew exactly what this was, and so did he. Except, he replayed the moment she'd signed the contract. Her hand hadn't shaken, not from confidence, but from determination. She'd looked at that document like it was a battlefield she was choosing to enter, not a rescue she was grateful for. And when she thanked him in the car, the sincerity in her voice had caught him off guard, as if she genuinely believed he'd done something kind, rather than simply executing a strategic move to stabilize his company's public image. Damien closed his laptop and poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, the burn welcome. His father's voice echoed from years past. "Never let them see you hurt, son. Emotion is a weapon they'll use against you." His reflection stared back at him from the bar mirror, dark circles under steel gray eyes, tension in shoulders that never fully relaxed. He looked every bit the man who'd built an empire on cold calculation. But there was something about Amara Bennett that didn't fit his calculations. Something in the way she'd sat across from him, terrified but unbending, signing away her freedom without a single tear. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Marcus Chen, his head of legal, entered with another folder. "The final marriage certificate and updated PR schedule." Marcus said, setting them on the desk. Tomorrow morning, you have a breakfast interview with Fortune. They'll want the love story. Give them one. Damien's voice was flat. The usual narrative, met at a charity event, instant connection, decided not to waste time. And if they ask about the speed of it, 3 weeks from meeting to marriage raises questions. Then tell them when you know, you know. The irony of the phrase twisted something in his chest. Marcus hesitated. Sir, if I may, Miss Bennet seems different from don't. Damien's voice cut like glass. This isn't about her personality. It's about stability. The board was questioning my judgment after the Sophia disaster. A stable marriage fixes that. 12 months, Marcus. Then we both walk away with what we need. The lawyer nodded, but his expression suggested he didn't quite believe it. After Marcus left, Damien returned to the window, staring out at the city lights. Somewhere in this building, in a guest room he'd assigned her, Amara was probably lying awake, wondering what she'd gotten herself into. He'd paid off her family's debts, cleared her brother's loan sharks, secured her mother's clinic. In return, she'd given him credibility, stability, and a year of her life. It should have been simple, except he couldn't stop thinking about the flicker in her eyes when she'd signed, the moment before she'd buried it under determination. The look of someone who just stepped off a cliff, hoping there was water below. Damien had promised himself after Sophia that he'd never let emotion cloud his judgment in again, never let someone close enough to wound him. This arrangement was perfect because it came with an expiration date, clear boundaries, and no illusions. So why did his chest feel tight when he'd watched her thank him in the car? Why had his hands shaken? Just once, barely perceptible, when he'd placed the ring on her finger during the brief civil ceremony that afternoon. He drained the whiskey and set the glass down with deliberate care. 1 year, he told himself. Then she walks away, you're stabilized, and everything returns to order. But as he headed toward his bedroom, passing her closed door in the hallway, he found himself pausing. No sound came from within. Was she asleep? Crying? Planning her escape? Damien forced himself to keep walking. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. And he'd do well to remember that before his carefully constructed walls developed cracks he couldn't afford to repair. Behind him, her door remained closed. Between them, a year stretched out like a minefield neither knew they were about to cross, one careful step at a time, toward a destination that looked nothing like the contract they'd signed. Morning arrived through floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the penthouse into a cathedral of light. Amara woke disoriented, her body expecting the cramped efficiency apartment she'd shared near the clinic, finding instead 1,200 square feet of guest suite decorated in whites and silvers. Beautiful, impersonal, expensive as a hotel room designed to feel like everywhere and nowhere at once. A knock at the door. Mrs. Voss? A woman's voice, professional and warm. I'm Elena, Mr. Voss's house manager. I have your schedule and wardrobe consultation at 9. Mrs. Voss. The title felt like wearing someone else's skin. Amar opened the door to find Elena, mid-50s, elegant in a charcoal dress, holding a leather portfolio and a tablet. Behind her, a wheeled rack displayed clothing, still wrapped in boutique tissue paper. Mr. Voss thought you might need assistance transitioning, Elena said, her smile practiced but not unkind. I've prepared a brief overview of house protocols, your public schedule for the month, and pre-approved responses for media inquiries. Pre-approved responses. Of course, Elena walked her through it all with the efficiency of a military briefing. No unscheduled social media posts, no interviews without Damien's communications team present, separate bedroom wings. Mr. Voss values his privacy. A curated wardrobe selected by a stylist who'd studied her measurements and coloring without ever meeting her. Everything designed to present the perfect image of Mrs. Damien Voss, a woman Amara was already learning didn't actually exist. And if I need something not on the schedule, Amara asked, you notify me, I notify Mr. Voss's assistant, and we coordinate. Elena's tone suggested this was perfectly normal, not at all like asking permission to breathe. Dinner that evening was served in a dining room designed for power, a table that could seat 20, though only 2 places were set, separated by enough mahogany to require raised voices. Instead, they ate in silence. Amara had changed into one of the pre-selected dresses, a navy sheath that fit perfectly and felt like costume. Damien sat across the expanse in shirt sleeves, jacket discarded somewhere, reviewing documents on a tablet propped beside his plate. He ate with mechanical precision. 3 bites, pause to read, sip of water, repeat. She found herself matching his pace without meaning to, slowing her fork so she wouldn't finish before him. Uncertain of the etiquette of this strange performance they were staging for an audience of staff who pretended not to watch. He noticed. His eyes flicked up, caught her mid-bite, tracked back to his screen, then returned. A crease appeared between his brows, barely visible, gone in a second, but she'd seen it. The moment of recognition that she was calibrating herself to him. "You don't need to do that," he said, not looking up. "Do what?" "Wait for me. This isn't—" He gestured vaguely at the table. "We're not performing for each other." Just for everyone else, she thought, but didn't say. The rest of the meal passed in careful silence, punctuated only by the soft clink of silverware on china and the occasional swipe of his finger across the screen. After dinner, Amara explored. The penthouse was a maze of glass and steel, open spaces that somehow felt claustrophobic, rooms that flowed into each other without walls but maintained invisible boundaries, a gym that looked untouched, a library with medical journals and business biographies arranged by spine color rather than subject, guest rooms staged like showrooms. Then she found the piano room. It was different from the rest. Darker, curtains drawn against the city lights, a Steinway grand sitting in shadow like a sleeping beast. Sheet music was scattered across the bench, yellowed at the edges, annotated in pencil. Chopin, Debussy, someone had played here once, regularly, passionately. She ran her fingers across the keys without pressing down, feeling the cool ivory. In the hallway beyond, she discovered a study with a door slightly ajar. Inside, a desk, floor-to-ceiling files, and a locked drawer with scratches around the keyhole like someone had forced it open in desperation. On the wall, a portrait turned to face the corner. She could see only the ornate gold frame and a sliver of what looked like a woman's shoulder in a lab coat. Amara backed away, heart hammering with the guilty feeling of having seen something not meant for her. She returned to the kitchen to clear her wineglass. Elena had offered, but Amara couldn't stomach being served like royalty when she felt more like inventory. As she rinsed the crystal under warm water, she hummed without thinking. An old song her mother used to play at the clinic. Something about healing and hope. She didn't hear him enter. Damien stopped in the doorway, one hand on the frame, completely still. The sound seemed to root him in place, not the melody itself, but the casualness of it, the unguarded humanity of someone humming while doing dishes in a kitchen that cost more than most houses. His jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes. Memory, maybe, or recognition of something lost. Amara turned, and he was already gone, footsteps retreating down the hall. The tabloid hit the next morning. Contract bride, sources say Voss marriage has 12-month expiration date. Amara saw it trending while checking her phone over coffee. Her stomach dropped. By noon, it was buried under a coordinated surge of content. Voss Foundation announces $50 million health initiative. Damien Voss and wife attend children's hospital benefit. Photos of them at the civil ceremony that had been held for immediate family only, but somehow looked warmly intimate in print. She watched it happen in real time. Crisis, strategy, execution. The story disappeared from the front page like it had never existed. This was the battlefield Elena had mentioned, and Damien's team moved across it like generals. When he emerged from his study that evening, tie loosened, exhaustion visible in the set of his shoulders, Amara met him in the hallway. "I need a schedule," she said. He blinked. "Elena gave you your schedule. If I'm supposed to be your wife, I need to know where you'll be so I'm not blindsided when photographers show up somewhere I'm not." A pause, then, "I'll have it sent to you." "In the Voss Foundation's audited reports, last 3 years." His eyebrow lifted, the first real expression she'd seen crack his composure. "Why?" "Because when someone asks me about your charitable work at the next event, I'd like to actually know what I'm talking about instead of reading from a script. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to approval. I'll have Marcus send them over. That night, unable to sleep, Amara returned to the piano room. She sat on the bench, surrounded by shadows and the ghost of whoever had played here before. Her fingers found middle C and pressed. A clear note that hung in the air like a question. In his study, Damien's hand stilled on the document he was reviewing. The note seemed to travel through the walls, finding him despite the distance he'd carefully architected into the floor plan. For a moment, he was 26 again, watching someone else play this same piano, believing in futures that didn't require contracts or calculations. He stood, walked to his door, stopped with his hand on the handle. The note faded into silence. Damien didn't open the door, didn't walk down the hall, didn't acknowledge that the sound had reached him at all. But he also didn't return to his desk. He stood there in the doorway of his study, listening to the silence that somehow felt thinner now, like a wall with a crack running through it, small but growing, letting sound through where there should have been nothing. In the piano room, Amar pressed another key, and in the space between the notes, something neither of them had planned for began. The slow erosion of distance, note by careful note, until the house with no echo started learning how to carry sound again. The gala was a study in controlled chaos. Red carpet unfurling like a tongue, camera flashes creating a strobe light storm that turned faces into masks and moments into freeze frames. Amara stepped from the car in a dress the color of arterial blood, silk that moved like water, shoulders bare and vulnerable under the scrutiny of 100 lenses. Damien emerged behind her in black, tailored perfection, not a thread out of place. The kind of armor that cost more than most people's cars and looked effortless. He offered his arm. She took it, and the cameras exploded. Mrs. Voss, how does it feel to be married to one of the most powerful men in the country? Amara, over here, give us a smile. Mr. Voss, is it true you proposed after only 2 weeks? Damien's hands settled at the small of her back, warm through silk, steady as a promise. We don't discuss our private life, he said, voice carrying the precise temperature of polite dismissal. Then lower meant only for her. Breathe, 3 more minutes. She breathed. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with old money and older grudges, crystal chandeliers casting prisms across faces that had learned to smile without meaning it. Investors who'd been nervous about Voss Enterprises' stability now approached with renewed confidence, reading their body language like a prospectus that had finally shown promising returns. Damien, wonderful to see you looking so settled. A board member whose name Amara couldn't remember clapped Damien's shoulder. Marriage suits you. Thank you, Richard. Damien's smile was a masterclass in controlled diplomacy. They worked the room like a choreographed dance, his hand never leaving her back, her smile never faltering, both of them performing intimacy with the precision of method actors who'd studied the role but never lived it. Until Alexander Hartford appeared. He was old money in human form, Harvard pedigree, family name on hospital wings, the kind of handsome that came with a trust fund and assumed access to whatever he wanted. His eyes found Amara and lit with interest that had nothing to do with politeness. Damien, a nod, dismissive, then turning fully to Amara. Mrs. Voss, I've been hoping for an introduction. Alexander Hartford, your husband and my father have been competitors for years. His smile suggested this was charming rather than threatening, but I'm much more interested in collaboration. Amara felt Damien's hand tighten fractionally at her back. Mr. Hartford. She extended her hand for a businesslike shake. He held it longer than necessary, thumb brushing her knuckles. Please call me Alex, and I insist on a dance later. I'd love to hear how you managed to capture the attention of a man everyone thought was married to his quarterly reports. Damien's jaw locked. It was subtle, a millimeter shift, tension gathering in the muscle, but Amara felt it in the air between them like a temperature drop. My wife's dance card is full, Damien said, each word precisely weighted. I wasn't aware you danced, Voss. Alexander's smile sharpened. But I suppose marriage changes a man. After he left, Damien repositioned, no longer beside her but slightly in front, his body angled like a shield, possession disguised as etiquette. She should have been annoyed by the caveman display. Instead, something warm and complicated unfurled in her chest. "I didn't know I had a full dance card," she murmured. "You do now. You don't dance. I'm learning to make exceptions." The dance floor was a battlefield of waltzing couples, political alliances set to strings. Damien had avoided it all night, until Amara, emboldened by champagne and the strange electricity humming between them, took his hand. "One dance," she said. "Then I'll let you go back to glowering at Hartford from across the room." His eyes narrowed. "I don't glower." "You absolutely glower. It's very brooding billionaire of you." She tugged him toward the parquet. "Come on, everyone's watching anyway. Might as well give them something to photograph." He followed because refusing would have made a scene, but his body radiated reluctance. On the floor, his hand found her waist, tentative, like he was handling something breakable. Her palms settled on his shoulder, and they began to move. He was technically perfect, every step calculated, every turn executed with mathematical precision, but his hand at her back trembled. Just once, just for a second. She felt it through the silk. "You're shaking," she whispered. "I'm not," but his fingers pressed firmer, as if to convince himself. "I haven't danced since," he stopped. "Since her?" The portrait in his study, facing the wall. The woman in the lab coat who'd sold him out. Amara understood suddenly. This wasn't just dancing. This was intimacy he'd learned to fear. "You don't have to talk about it," she said softly. "Good." His gray eyes met hers, storm clouds with lightning behind them. "Because I don't want to." They finished the dance in silence, but his hand never shook again. She found him in the garden an hour later. The gala's noise was muffled here, replaced by fountain splash and crickets, the city's light pollution turning the sky orange-purple. Amara had slipped off her heels, was walking barefoot across cool stone, when she heard him on his phone. "Don't care what the optics are, Marcus. If Hartford Global makes another move toward acquisition, we respond with litigation. I don't—" He paused, listening, then quieter. "No, this isn't about her. This is about principle." Amara stepped on a twig. Damien turned, phone lowering. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Her with shoes dangling from one eye and him with his tie finally loosened. Both of them stripped of their performance armor in the garden shadows. "Sorry," she said. "I needed air." "So did I." He pocketed the phone. His gaze dropped to her bare feet. "You'll cut yourself on the stone." "I have thick skin." "I've noticed." Something flickered across his face, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one, a muscle memory of humor he had forgotten how to access. She laughed, unguarded, genuine, the sound escaping before she could stop it. And he almost smiled. The corners of his mouth lifted fractionally, eyes softening for half a second before control reasserted itself. Almost. But she'd seen it. And suddenly the garden felt smaller, warmer, like the space between them had developed its own climate. "We should go back," he said. "Probably." Neither of them moved. The car ride home was silent, exhaustion settling over them like a blanket. Amara leaned against the window, watching the city blur past, light and shadow, speed and stillness. Her eyes drifted closed. She woke hours later in her bed, still in the red dress, a note on the nightstand in Elena's handwriting. "Mr. Voss carried you up. Didn't want to wake you." On the chair beside her door, his tuxedo jacket, draped carefully, still warm. At 2 a.m., Damien's phone buzzed in his study. Julian Crane's message lit the screen. A photo of Amara's brother outside a payday lending office, looking young and scared and desperate. The caption, "Your bride's baggage has receipts. Wonder what else she's hiding." Damien stared at the image, jaw tight. He could leak this, use it to renegotiate terms, remind Amara that the contract gave him leverage over her family's reputation. Instead, he opened an encrypted browser. 30 minutes later, every remaining cent of her brother's predatory loans was paid off through an anonymous LLC that couldn't be traced to Voss Enterprises or Damien personally. The transaction left no paper trail to Amara, no way for her to know, no leverage for him to use. He deleted Julian's message and sat in the dark, wondering when protection had stopped being strategy and started being something he couldn't name. Morning headline: A real marriage. Voss and wife shine at charity gala. The photo showed them dancing, his hand at her back, her looking up at him, both caught in a moment that looked less like performance and more like possibility. The article speculated about genuine affection, real connection, a love story hiding inside the business arrangement. The public wanted it to be true. Damien stared at the photo and realized, with something between panic and wonder, that he wanted it to be true too. In her room, Amar saw the same article and touched the screen where his almost smile had been captured forever by a camera that didn't know it was witnessing something rare. The moment a wall developed its first crack. The storm hit on a Thursday night, the kind that made the penthouse feel like a ship in rough seas, rain hammering glass, lightning turning the skyline into a flickering negative image. The power went out at 10, came back at 10:15, and Amara, restless and unable to sleep, wandered. She found herself outside Damien's study. The door was open, unusual since he kept it locked like a vault. But the storm must have disrupted the electronic mechanism because she pushed it easily and stepped into darkness broken only by emergency lighting that cast everything in cold blue. The desk, the files, the portrait still facing the wall, and the drawer unlocked, hanging open like a mouth. Amara knew she shouldn't look, knew that whatever was inside was meant to stay buried. But her hands moved anyway, pulling the drawer wider, finding the file labeled Bennett in neat block letters, her father's name. She opened it. The report was 10 years old, printed on letterhead from Voss Biotech. Investigation into intellectual property theft. Bennett Medical AI Research. Her father's photo clipped to the first page. Younger than she remembered him, wearing the confident smile of a man who didn't know he was about to be accused of corporate espionage. She read and felt the floor tilt beneath her. Dr. James Bennett, head of R&D, suspected of selling proprietary AI diagnostic algorithms to Hartford Global. Evidence suggests systematic data transfer over 6 months. Theft coincided with the Voss Biotech IPO, nearly tanking company valuation. Estimated damage, $200 million. Her father, the man who'd raised her to believe in integrity, who'd built a small clinic on principles of accessible healthcare. A thief, or accused of being one. The file ended with, investigation suspended due to Bennett's sudden death. Case closed without prosecution. Amara's hands shook. Damien had known, all along when he'd offered her the contract, when he'd promised to save her family. He'd known her father had nearly destroyed him. She turned to the portrait on the wall. Her fingers found the frame, turned it around. The woman in the photo was beautiful. Dark hair, lab coat, standing beside a younger Damien at what looked like a charity event, his arm around her waist, his smile unguarded in a way Amara had never seen. A sticky note on the back, yellowed with age. Sophia, the one who sold us out to Hartford after James. 2 betrayals, her father, then his fiancée. Both connected to the same rival company, both leaving Damien with wreckage. Looking for something? Amara spun. Damien stood in the doorway, soaked from rain, holding a bag from the pharmacy. Had he gone out in this storm? His eyes went from her to the open file to the portrait in her hands. The air froze. Oh, why me? Her voice came out raw. Of all the women you could have chosen for this arrangement, why me? He didn't move, didn't deflect, just stood there dripping on hardwood and said, at first, because of him. The truth slammed into her ribs like a fist. You married me for revenge. I married you because the board demanded stability and you needed money. Your father, he stopped, jaw working. Your father's name was a bonus, a way to close a circle that should have stayed closed. And now? She heard the tremor in her voice, hated it. Is it still revenge? His silence was louder than any answer. Not denial. Fear. She handed him the file, hands steady despite the earthquake inside her. You should have told me. Would you have signed if I had? I don't know, but at least I would have had a choice. She walked past him, close enough to smell rain and expensive cologne and something underneath like regret. He didn't try to stop her. Behind her, lightning painted the study white. She heard him move, the rustle of paper, the scrape of frame against wall, turning the portrait back to face the corner. And she understood. He hated himself for still needing the shield. In her room, Amara pulled her suitcase from the closet. She packed mechanically, dresses she hadn't chosen, shoes that cost more than a month's rent at her old apartment, the life of Mrs. Voss folded into neat squares. But when she reached for her mother's photo on the nightstand, she stopped. "He saved my family," she whispered to the empty room. "The clinic, my brother. He gave me a way out." The contract had 10 months left. 10 months of performance, pretense, playing wife to a man who'd married her to settle a decade-old score with her dead father. Except he'd also paid off her brother's predatory loans without telling her. Elena had mentioned it in passing, thinking Amara knew, and he defended her to the press, and his hand had shaken when they danced. Do I owe him the rest of me? Her suitcase stayed open, packed but undecided, while rain beat against glass and lightning illuminated the question she couldn't answer. When does survival become something else? When does a transaction develop a heartbeat? And most dangerous of all, what happens when you start to care about the man who bought you, even knowing all the reasons he did it? Amar sat on the bed, still in yesterday's clothes, and stared at her ring. 10 months. She just had to survive 10 more months. The problem was, survival was starting to feel like the wrong goal entirely. The headline broke at 6 a.m., Julian Crane's voice practically audible in the all-caps fury. Billionaire buys wife to sanitize brand. Inside Damien Voss's contract marriage. Amara woke to Elena knocking urgently. "Mrs. Voss, you need to see this." The article was everywhere, trending on every platform, picked up by every outlet. The story Julian had been waiting to drop like a bomb. Photos of the contract signing, anonymous sources detailing the 12-month term, financial breakdowns of what Damien paid to clear her family's debts. Even speculation about her father's alleged theft from Voss Biotech. They'd made her look like a gold digger. Made him look like a man so desperate for good PR he'd bought a wife like furniture. By 7 a.m., paparazzi had found the penthouse. By 8, they were a swarm. Cameras, microphones, reporters shouting questions that sounded like accusations. Amara tried to leave for the clinic, made it 3 steps past the building's entrance before they closed in. "Amara, did you know about the contract's PR clause? How much did he pay you? Is it true your father stole from Voss and you used that guilt to—" Someone shoved. She stumbled, caught herself on a camera that swung back and hit her shoulder. More shoving, a microphone too close to her face, hands grabbing. Security trying to push through but drowning in the crowd. She heard her name being screamed like a weapon. Then, "Get back!" Damien's voice cutting through chaos like a knife. He appeared from nowhere, or maybe he'd been there all along, watching from the building, and placed himself between her and the cameras with the physical authority of someone used to claiming space. "She is my wife by choice," he said, each word enunciated with surgical precision. "You touch her, you answer to me." The crowd hesitated. Something in his voice, not threat exactly, but promise, made them step back. "Mr. Voss, is it true the marriage is a contract?" "My marriage is my business. This interview is over." He took Amara's arm, gentle but unyielding, and walked them both back inside. The internet flipped within hours. Suddenly she was the victim. He was the protective husband, and the narrative shifted from scandal to sympathy. Comments flooded in. "She looks terrified. Leave her alone." Damien Voss defending his wife like that? Maybe it is real. Contract or not, that's how a man should protect his partner. Inside, Amara stood in the penthouse living room, hands shaking with adrenaline aftershock. Damien poured her water from the kitchen, brought it to her without speaking. "Thank you," she said. "I should have done it sooner." His jaw was tight. Should have seen Julian would go there. "You couldn't have known." "I did know. I've known Julian for 15 years. He plays dirty when he's threatened." Damien set down his own untouched glass. "I just didn't think he'd—" He stopped, something raw crossing his face. "I'm sorry." The apology hung between them. weighted with all the things they hadn't said since the study, since the file, since the portrait. That night, Damien sat in an emergency board meeting that felt more like an execution. Sponsors threatening to pull out. Investors demanding explanations. The room smelled like expensive cologne and panic. "We need a statement," someone said. "Distance the company from the marriage. Clarify it as personal." "No," Damien's voice was flat. "Damien, be reasonable. I won't offer my marriage as a commodity for your comfort. The company's reputation stands on its own merit." Silence. Then murmurs. Then Richard leaning forward. "Your marriage is the company's reputation right now. You made it that way when you signed the contract. Then we'll rebuild without using her as collateral." He left the meeting before they could argue. Julian found Amara 2 days later at the clinic. She was in her mother's office reviewing patient files that had nothing to do with Voss or contracts or the media circus her life had become when he knocked. "Mrs. Voss." Julian Crane was handsome in the way of men who'd never been told no. Expensive suit, easy smile, eyes that calculated even while pretending warmth. "I'm sorry for the intrusion, but I hoped we could talk. I have nothing to say to you, not even about your father." He sat uninvited. "Damien married you to punish James Bennett's memory. You know that, don't you? Found the file, I'm guessing. Saw the accusations." Amara's hand stilled on the papers. "He used you," Julian continued, voice soft like he was delivering bad news he regretted. "Used your desperation, your family's debt. Made himself look magnanimous while really just settling a decade-old grudge. Get out, Ottawa. Help me expose him properly. The financial irregularities, the shell companies, the questionable charity structure, and I'll end your debts forever. Real freedom. Amara, not contract freedom. I said get out." He stood, left a business card on her desk. "Think about it. I'll be waiting." She refused. Told herself Julian was manipulating her, that whatever grudge existed between him and Damien wasn't her battlefield. Then the clinic received a foreclosure notice. Not possible. Damien had paid it off. The debt was cleared. But there it was on official letterhead. Predatory lending clause reinstatement. Property seizure in 30 days unless $500,000 paid in full. Amara called the number. Got transferred. Got stonewalled. Got told it was a clerical error that would take months to resolve through proper channels. Months they didn't have. Panic clawed back. The old kind, the drowning kind, the kind that made her sign a contract in the first place. Julian's card burned in her pocket. She met him at a coffee shop, public and neutral. "What do you need?" "Simple data transfer. Copy some files from Damien's home server, contracts, communications, nothing classified. Just enough to show the board his recent decisions have been questionable." That's corporate espionage. That's transparency. I'm not asking you to steal, Amara. Just copy. Documents that should be public anyway. His smile was practiced sympathy. Your clinic gets saved. Your brother stays safe. And Damien learns that buying people has consequences. She thought of her mother's life work, the patients, the staff. "Nothing illegal," she said, "just public contracts." "Just public contracts," Julian agreed. She used Damien's study computer when he was at a late meeting, found the files Julian wanted, acquisition agreements, partner contracts, foundation disbursements. Nothing that looked damaging, nothing that seemed wrong. She copied them to a drive and handed it off to Julian's courier. "You did the right thing," the courier said. Amara wasn't sure what right looked like anymore. What she didn't know, Julian's team had already prepared forged documents. They took her copied files, replaced the metadata, embedded fabricated evidence of money laundering through the Voss Foundation. Made it look like Damien had been using charity donations as shell accounts to hide embezzled funds. When the story broke 48 hours later, Amara's copied files were the source documents cited in every article. And she realized too late that Julian hadn't needed information. He'd needed a scapegoat. He'd needed her. Voss embezzlement scandal. Billionaire accused of laundering millions through foundation. The headline detonated at dawn. Stock nosedived. Partners suspended contracts. Board called emergency session. Federal investigators opened preliminary inquiry. Damien's phone exploded with calls he didn't answer. In his office, he stared at the leaked documents, his signature, his letterhead, transfers that looked real enough to fool auditors. Except he'd never authorized them, had never even seen these accounts. Someone had fabricated evidence, and the metadata suggested it came from his home server. Only 3 people had access: him, Marcus, and Amara. The realization hit like a blade between ribs. She'd been in his study that night, had access. Her family clinic had just gotten a mysterious foreclosure notice that conveniently vanished after Julian's initial approach. Julian. Of course. The play was elegant: turn Amara against him, use her access, frame them both while destroying Damien's reputation. Damien picked up his phone to call her. Put it down, picked it up again. Her number rang 4 times before voicemail. He didn't leave a message. Amara's calls went unanswered. All of them. She tried his cell, his office, Marcus, even Elena. Nothing. She fought her way to Voss Tower through a media gauntlet that had somehow gotten worse. Security blocked her at reception. I need to see my husband. Mr. Voss isn't taking visitors. I'm not a visitor, I'm his. She stopped. What was she? Wife by contract? Judas by circumstance? Please, just tell someone I'm here. The security guard's earpiece crackled. He listened, face impassive. Mr. Voss says he's in meetings all day. Translation: he didn't want to see her. Amara pulled out her phone, recorded a voicemail with shaking hands. Those files weren't what I took. I copied contracts, public ones, nothing classified. Julian, he must have swapped them. Please listen. Please, I didn't mean. Her voice cracked. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. She sent it and walked away, knowing sorry wasn't enough. In his office, Damien stared at the ring on his desk. Hers, couriered that morning with no note. Anger tried to drown, hurt, and failed. He'd been betrayed before. Should have seen this coming. Should have known that contracts didn't prevent treachery, just documented it. But when he played her voicemail, heard the break in her voice, something in him fractured differently. Those files weren't what I took. What if she was telling the truth? Amara traced the courier Julian had sent, found him at a delivery hub, nervous and young, barely out of college. She cornered him with a recording app running on her phone. I need to know what happened to the files I gave you. I don't know what you're talking about. You picked up a drive from me 4 days ago. What did you do with it? He glanced around, sweating. Look, I just deliver. But they told me. He stopped. Told you what? That if anyone asked, I should say the files came directly from Voss's server. That's it. I don't know what's on them. Please, I have a family. Who told you to say that? Julian's analyst said it was just corporate stuff, legal but sensitive. But if you're asking, he met her eyes. What was really on that drive? Nothing that justified this. Amara kept recording. Say it again. Say who told you to lie. He did. Every word. She had it all on tape. She headed back to Voss Tower with proof. The elevator opened to the lobby where reporters had somehow breached security. They saw her and surged forward. Questions became shouts, became physical barrier. A microphone swung toward her face, hit her cheekbone. She felt skin split, wetness, pain bright and sharp. Camera flashes popped like stars. Then Damien was there, pushing through the crowd, face thunderous, pulling her inside with hands that shook. You're bleeding. You're breaking, she whispered, seeing his eyes up close for the first time in days, seeing the damage there. He took her to a conference room, first aid kit, antiseptic that stung. His hands gentle on her face even though his jaw was tight with whatever he was feeling, anger or hurt or both. I didn't betray you, Wem, Amara said. I know. His thumb brushed near the cut, feather light. I listened to your voicemail. I know. She pulled the audio file up on her phone, set it on the table between them. Julian's courier. He admits the swap. Damien stared at the phone, then at her. Then impossibly, his eyes went bright with something that looked like relief or regret, or both. I'm sorry, he said. for not listening sooner. I gave him access. Her voice broke. I thought I was just copying public contracts, but I gave him what he needed to destroy you. You gave him what he would have gotten anyway. Julian's had been looking for an opening for years. Damien's hand covered hers on the table. This isn't your fault. But they both knew it was partly her fault, and partly his, and partly the fault of two people who'd signed a contract without understanding that some things couldn't be controlled by terms and clauses. Amara looked at their hands, his over hers, wedding bands catching fluorescent light. What do we do now? She whispered. Damien's grip tightened. We fight back. That night, Damien listened to the courier's confession on repeat. Julian's analyst admitting to fabricating evidence. The plan to paint the saint as a thief. Every detail of a frame-up designed to destroy both Voss and Amara in one move. Resolve replaced rage. At midnight, he assembled his war room. Helena from finance, sharp-eyed and precise. Marcus from legal, already drafting injunctions. Rafe from security, tracing digital footprints back to Julian's servers. We go live, Damien said. Board meeting tomorrow, live streamed. We expose everything. The fabrication, the courier, the shell accounts Julian actually runs. We don't just defend, we annihilate. The board's already voting to suspend you in the morning, Marcus warned. You'll have maybe an hour. Then we make it count. Helena pulled up financial records. I can prove these accounts don't exist in our system, but we need Julian's actual records to show where the money really went. Leave that to me, Rafe said. Plans formed, strategies aligned. By 3 a.m., they had a battle plan that would either save Voss Enterprises or burn it down trying. Amara returned to the clinic, exhausted and aching. Her mother found her in the office, staring at nothing. Do you love him? Her mother asked quietly. Amara looked up. What? Damien, do you love him? The question hung there, impossible and obvious. Amara opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again and said nothing. But her eyes, bright with tears she wouldn't shed, said everything. Her mother nodded. Then you'd better help him win. The board called an emergency vote for 9 a.m. Suspend Damien Voss as CEO pending investigation. Damien stalled with a procedural clause, some arcane bylaw requiring 24 hours notice for executive removal. It bought them time, barely. While his team worked, Amara did something reckless. She remembered Julian's schedule from the charity gala. He'd mentioned a late meeting at his office tower. She still had her donor badge from the event, used it to access the building's executive floor after hours. The security was lighter than she expected, or maybe she was just lucky, or maybe she didn't care anymore about getting caught. She found his private server room behind biometric locks she bypassed with a borrowed maintenance card. Thank you, Rafe's security contacts. Inside, hard drives, backup systems, and a printed schedule for a press conference the next day. Julian's planning to address the Voss scandal by positioning himself as the whistleblower who'd saved investors from a criminal. Amara photographed everything, plugged in a drive Rafe had given her, triggered a cloud upload to Damien's team. Alarms tripped, red lights, sirens, security closing in. She ran, corridor chase, locked stairwell, her phone at 3% battery. She ducked into a janitorial closet, heart hammering, and whispered to herself, 1 year, Amara. Be brave for 1 year. Then Rafe's voice on her dying phone, got it. Everything uploaded. Get out now. She did. The shareholders' meeting was theater, cameras rolling, board members arranged like a jury, Julian Crane sitting front row with his polished lies ready. Ladies and gentlemen, the board chair began, we're here to address serious allegations. The doors swung open. Amara walked in, bruised from the paparazzi hit, cut on her cheek visible under harsh lights, but steady. She carried a folder that felt like a weapon. The room went silent. She dropped it on the table in front of the chair. Courier statement, metadata timestamps, bank trails leading to Julian Crane's shell corporations. Julian's face went white. I signed a contract to save my family, Amara said, voice carrying to every camera. And maybe that was desperate. Maybe that was naive, but she gestured to Damien, never once asked me to sell my soul. He could have. Could have used my father's history against me. Could have trapped me with leverage. He didn't. Damien stood, taking the floor with the authority of someone who'd built his empire from nothing and refused to watch it burn on lies. What you're seeing in those leaked documents isn't embezzlement. It's fabrication. And I can prove it. He nodded to Helena. The screens behind them lit up. Real-time feed from Julian's server room. Files actively deleting. Until Rafe's team halted them remotely, capturing everything. Emergency audit results, Helena announced, distributing packets. Voss Foundation fully exonerated, every transaction accounted for. But Mr. Crane's offshore accounts show the actual laundering. Funds moving through shell charities he controls, skimmed from investor capital over 3 years. Marcus stood. Federal injunctions served this morning. Mr. Crane's assets frozen pending investigation. The room erupted. Cameras swung to Julian, who'd gone from white to red, standing with barely controlled fury. You can't, he turned to Damien. You think you've won? You bought a wife to play saint and I married a woman who's twice the person you'll ever be, Damien said quietly. And unlike you, she didn't need to fabricate evidence to prove it. Julian's rage slipped. You're all believing this? She stole those files. She admitted I copied public contracts, Amara said. You fabricated the rest. Prove it. Rafe stepped forward with 2 federal agents. We don't have to. You just did. On the hot mic, still live streaming, Julian's confession had been captured. She stole those files. Admission of knowledge. Admission of the frame-up. The crowd turned. Cameras captured everything. Board members stood, rescinding the suspension vote before it was called. Julian was escorted out in handcuffs, still shouting denials that sounded like confessions. When the cameras cut, when the room exhaled, when the legal team dispersed and the board members filed out, Amara and Damien stood alone in the aftermath. You won, she whispered. Not if I lose you. His voice cracked on the words. Amara. She stepped back, eyes wet. The contract has 3 months left. I think we both need space to figure out what's real and what's just survival. He nodded, throat working. If that's what you need, it is. She left before he could see her cry. Weeks passed like scar tissue forming, painful, necessary, changing the shape of everything. Voss stock steadied. The investigation cleared Damien completely. Julian Crane faced multiple federal charges. And quietly, without press releases or fanfare, the Voss Bennett Health Fund began repairing clinics across the city, her mother's first, then others, expanding like a promise kept in secret. Amara moved out to a small apartment near the clinic. The ring went in a drawer. The contract clock kept ticking, but they lived apart, spoke through lawyers and assistants, existed in separate orbits that had briefly, impossibly, aligned. She told herself it was better this way. Cleaner, honest. She didn't believe it. The press conference happened on a Tuesday. Damien stood before cameras without his usual armor. No script, no PR team filtering his words. Just him and a truth he'd avoided for too long. I want to address the contract marriage. Direct, unflinching. Yes, it was transactional. Yes, I married Amara Bennett to stabilize my company after scandal threatened its credibility. And yes, I knew her father had been accused of theft from my company years ago. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward. But what started as strategy became something I didn't expect. She taught me that power cannot replace humanity, that control is just fear and expensive clothing, that the walls I built to protect myself were actually a prison. He paused. I'm donating half my personal holdings, not company assets, but my own wealth, to the Voss Bennett Health Fund. Because the best thing I ever did wasn't building an empire. It was meeting someone who reminded me why empires matter in the first place. The room erupted in questions. He answered none of them, just walked away, hoping she was watching. She was. The gala was 6 weeks later, charity event, black tie, the kind she used to attend as Mrs. Voss when that title meant something other than expired contract. Amara almost didn't go, but her mother insisted. You've been hiding long enough, sweetheart. Go. Wear something red. Remind the world who you are. So she did. The dress was flowing crimson, the kind that moved like liquid fire. Her hair loose, no performance, no script. Just herself walking into a ballroom where chandeliers cast golden light like benediction. She saw him immediately. Damien stood alone near the windows, black tuxedo perfect. But his eyes, when they found her across the room, looked like a man seeing water after years of desert. He approached slowly. The crowd parted without realizing it, giving them space that felt like the whole world narrowing to this moment. Still attending events you hate, she said, voice light despite her hammering heart. Only when there's a chance, you'll be here. He stopped at a respectful distance, close but not touching. You look red, she smiled. I know. Beautiful. I was going to say beautiful. Around them, bouquet lights drifted like embers, camera flashes or reflections, or something magical the room was doing with their nearness. No contracts, Damien said quietly. No terms, no 12-month limits or exit clauses. What are you offering this time? His smile was soft, real, the one she'd only seen that night in the garden when he'd almost let himself be happy. Just forever. If you'll have it. Amara looked at him, the man who'd bought her cooperation and somehow lost himself in the process. The man who'd been betrayed so thoroughly he'd forgotten how to trust. The man who'd learned, slowly, painfully, beautifully, that love wasn't a liability, but the only thing worth the risk. I'll have it, she whispered. He didn't touch her until she nodded permission. Then his hand found hers, fingers lacing, wedding bands that had meant contract now meaning choice. The kiss wasn't for cameras, wasn't for board members or investors or the press that would dissect it tomorrow. It was for them, messy, certain, the kind of kiss that tasted like truth after years of performance. Applause swelled, music followed. The gala continued around them like they were the eye of a beautiful storm. When they pulled apart, still close enough to share breath, Damien pressed his forehead to hers. I wrote the contract to own you, he said, voice barely audible over strings. Instead, it taught me how to love you. Amara laughed, bright, free, the sound of someone who'd stopped running from herself. Good, because I'm never signing another contract as long as I live. Not even a marriage license? That's not a contract. That's a promise. Then let's make one. And they did. Not in front of lawyers or cameras or witnesses who'd demand performance. But there in a ballroom painted gold, beneath lights that looked like stars, two people who'd signed away 12 months found forever in the space between then and now. The girl who'd sacrificed her freedom for family learned she didn't have to choose. The man who'd forgotten how to feel remembered that control was just another word for cowardice. And the contract that had bound them became the thing that set them free. Not because it ended, but because they chose each other beyond its terms, beyond its limits, beyond everything except the simple, terrifying, beautiful truth. Love was never the transaction. It was what happened when you stopped counting costs and started counting moments instead. And theirs, finally, impossibly, truly, had just begun.